Hi, this is Ian Nathan, director of Aliens Expanded, and you are listening to The Graveyard Show.
Welcome to the Graveyard.
And welcome to another edition of the Graveyard Show podcast. I am your caretaker, and the graveyard is open. Well, I finally got around to watching the documentary Leap of Faith, William Friedkin on The Exorcist. And I have to say, I don't know what took me so long to get to that movie. It's been something that I've wanted to see for quite a while. And it did not disappoint because, well, I mean, it's not a movie really per se about The Exorcist. It's really more about William Friedkin, what has inspired him, his love of art and music. And the other thing, too, is that if you're an aspiring filmmaker, I cannot recommend this enough for you to watch. I mean, it really is filmmaking 101. He talks about all aspects of directing, from the script, in this case, adapting a novel into a script, and what works, what doesn't work, working with actors, the importance of sound, and as I mentioned, his love of art and music and how that inspired him in his directing. It's just some great insights on the man himself and what he was able to do with The Exorcist. And I didn't realize this, but he's not a fan of the ending of the movie, and he goes into why. And it makes sense. I love the ending of the movie. I thought it worked, but yeah, he didn't think it worked. And also, when you talk about sound, you know, a lot of directors I don't think really take sound into account very much. One director that I noticed very early on in his career, who I really enjoy his films, James Wan. I've always found that James Wan is not afraid to let his movies breathe, and is not afraid to let his movies, he's not afraid to allow them to be quiet at times. And it really does work so well. And William Friedkin talks about, most importantly with regarding to sound too, is not just sound effects, but also how the scoring worked, or in this case, a lot of times didn't work, and why he chose what he did for the final film. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Ridley Scott with Alien. If you are a fan of the film and you've watched a lot and maybe you pay attention to the score, you notice that the opening credits and the end credits sound very different than the rest of the score, and that was because Ridley Scott wound up choosing two very different pieces for that, even though Jerry Goldsmith scored the top and the tail as well as everything else. Ridley Scott decided to go in a different direction. It's really important to see how filmmakers decide when to make that decision and why they choose or chose to make those decisions. But definitely check it out. It's Leap of Faith, William Friedkin on The Exorcist. Cannot recommend this enough, as I just mentioned. There's just a lot of great stuff in there. I think you're going to really enjoy it. And speaking of documentaries, Aliens fans, are you ready? Are you ready for the new super documentary that will be coming out called Aliens Expanded? Well, if you are and you're a fan of the Aliens film, you have come to the right place today. Because as you heard at the top of the show, the director of the new documentary, Aliens Expanded, is here. Ian Nathan will be joining me in just a moment to talk about his latest film, produced by our friends over at Creator VC. Of course, they're the ones who have done super documentaries like In Search of Darkness 1, 2, 3, In Search of Tomorrow, and In Search of Darkness 1990 through 94, which will be coming out soon. David Weiner's been here, of course, the director of those movies. Robin Block, the CEO of Creator VC and the executive producer and creator of these series. Weary Pines has been here in the past as well, so just a little fun fact. So Jerry Goldsmith scored Alien, and then James Horner came in to score Aliens. That was the second time James Horner came into a film series to score a sequel to Jerry Goldsmith's original. When was the first? Well, The same year, Jerry Goldsmith scored Alien in 1979. He scored another film called Star Trek the Motion Picture. And a few years later, James Horner would come in to score Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan, and then eventually Star Trek III The Search for Spock. So there you go. A little fun trivia for you there. After the interview, I'll do what I always like to do with Creator VC movies. I will go over the different pay tiers that you can do to pre-order the film. Very quickly, though, some quick news. Encyclopocalypse. There we go. Encyclopocalypse Publications. I always have a hard time when I see that Encyclopocalypse. There we go. I got to say it slowly. Encyclopocalypse Publications, easy for me to say, has joined forces with Shout Factory to novelize the cult classic 1986 film Chopping Mall. Based on the screenplay, Chopping Mall, the novelization, promises to deliver all the laughs and thrills that have made Chopping Mall a beloved fixture in horror cinema, reimagined as a collectible paperback book. The book's going to be available November 19th, as well as an audiobook. But wait, they're not done. Encyclopocalypse Publications is also doing a novelization of the classic Ed Wood film Plan 9 from Outer Space. And that's going to be available for purchase on October 10th. And you can pre-order these books at encyclopocalypse.com. You're going to have to look that one up yourself, folks. I'm not going to spell it out. Encyclopocalypse. So it's encyclopedia and apocalypse. Encyclopocalypse. There you go. All right. As you hear in the background, a new grave is being added, and it cannot be added quick enough before I say Encyclopocalypse again. And when that happens, that means my guest is here, and it's time for me to get to work. There's an extensive brand new documentary coming our way about the classic James Cameron film Aliens, appropriately titled Aliens Expanded. And joining me now is the director of that very movie. Mr. Ian Nathan is here. Ian, thank you for joining me here on the Graveyard Show podcast. Great to have you.
Yeah, great pleasure. I'm looking forward to our chat.
So let's talk about the movie, of course. When were you first approached about directing the film?
This is a slightly long story. In a sense, it goes back a few years. Aliens Expanded is made by a company called Creator VC, which has made the In Search of Darkness documentaries, which have been very successful. It also made a documentary called In Search of Tomorrow, which was about sort of 80s science fiction, the whole era of 1980s science fiction going into the 1990s. And because I had a background I worked for Empire magazine and I'd written books about genre films like Alien, I was asked to be a talking head on In Search of Tomorrow, directed by David Weiner, who kept me on in an interview for 3 hours. We just chatted away. And a lot of the stuff we talked about was James Cameron, especially Aliens. Talked a bit about The Abyss and a bit about Terminator as well, and Terminator 2. But it was the Aliens that formed the backbone of our conversation. And the producer and Robin Block, who runs Creative VC, he sort of stayed in touch with me. And over these sort of intervening years, he sort of said, would you be interested in directing a documentary? And if you were, what kind of subject would you like? And we talked a little bit about a Stephen King documentary, maybe doing the adaptations. And the problem with that is, again, it's a big subject, a big wide subject, and there's a lot of not very good adaptations. So honing in on the kind of passion and love in that was hard. And then sort of not quite out of the blue, but relatively unexpectedly, Robin called me and said, come to a lunch, I've got an idea for you. And so I went to lunch and he said, I want to make a documentary that takes the same kind of comprehensiveness of In Search of Darkness, this covering of an era, yet applies that technique to one film. So it goes microscopic rather than macroscopic, but it's still really broad, wide-ranging. How far can you delve into a film and how wide can you go within the bounds of one film and to tell its story? And he said, what film do you think we could do this with? What film has the potential for that? And I think almost simultaneously, we both went, Aliens. And we kind of grinned and thought, right, we're onto it now. And there was a reason why Aliens worked rather than say Alien, the Ridley Scott original. And it was because it had this extra dimension of fan passion and love and community around it and within it. The first film I think is held in something of a degree of awe and respect, and it is a masterpiece. But the sequel has this community element to it that draws people in. That it's a friend that once you've seen it accompanies you your whole life. That idea of films as a soundtrack to your life. For so many people, it's Aliens. It's there's something in it that just draws people to it constantly, and endlessly rewatchable and approachable. And I think that helped me kind of consider about, okay, now once I had that as a starting point, there's all sorts of places you can then go. And so it was the film that seemed to answer the call of the idea of the documentary. Plus, it was a film I myself have huge amounts of passion for. I saw in the cinema and felt comfortable with to go on this long journey and go inside it. So that was the launching pad. Then I knew it was the right film and the right documentary style, and I had to answer the call of that, that quest, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, Aliens is definitely one of those sequels. When you talk about great sequels, you could also place that as maybe the best in the series, kind of like Empire Strikes Back. I remember seeing both that and the original. I was incredibly young when I saw Alien in the theater. And it scared the hell out of me. And I remember seeing Aliens, knowing or going into it what it was going to be like, and then being totally blown away, because it's not a science fiction horror movie like Alien. It's a science fiction action movie directed by, a guy who did the Terminator movie at that point.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible. And both left a really incredible impact on me as a kid and a teenager. Now, do you have any moments like that where science fiction, when were you first realized that you were drawn to science fiction?
I suppose I have a relatively familiar story in the sense of how I grew up and how I watched films. It begins with Bond, watching, I grew up, I was a young child in the 1970s. I was a teenager in the 1980s. Those 2 decades had a big impact on me in terms of my film love. And then from 90s onwards, it becomes more of a part of my career. So that's kind of my journey. And the 1970s was my parents, and it was Bond. I grew up at a time when you could only watch films when they came on TV. But I had a love of science fiction TV programs, of Doctor Who in Britain and all that. I became very obsessed with that side of it. And what happened really was me, like a million other kids, Spielberg, George Lucas, began it. My dad took me to see Close Encounters, and he took me to see Star Wars at the cinema. And what feels like an intensely personal experience for me was shared by so many other people, yet had a lasting impact. I was quite a, involved child, let us say. And, I remember clearly when Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, and there were kind of newspaper adverts, long time before we had the internet. There was just newspaper adverts in the local papers. And I didn't talk for a whole day. And my mother couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, what had hit me. And eventually she sort of prized out of me this newspaper ad and me pointing to it. And she said, "You just want to see this film?" And that was what it was. And she took me dutifully. And that was kind of where I was. I was kind of obsessed already. And there was Blade Runner. But it gets to a point, and this is sort of the seminal moment really, is that she told me one night that she was going to see a science fiction film called Alien, but I couldn't come because I was too young. And of course I was furious about this. I went to science fiction films. She knew that. This is what I did. All the films she'd taken me to, all the films I'd gone to and obsessed over. And she said, no, it was too scary. It was too adult. So I couldn't go. And the next day, I was kind of almost getting her out of bed and saying, well, what was it like? Well, what was it? Tell me all about it. And she said something very sort of influential, I suppose, on the difference between Alien and Aliens and maybe those films like Star Wars. that she said it was so frightening, it was hysterical. And she said it was so scary, the audience laughed. And I didn't quite understand that. I was 9 years old. I mean, why are you laughing at a scary movie? I now understand. I watched it on VHS. I bunked off school and watched it with the Thing one afternoon, a great afternoon. Um, and I understand that now, that sense is something so powerful, so frightening, and so shocking that what it would get out of an audience is hysteria. And if you fast forward 7 years, and my dad takes me to see Aliens, the sequel, obviously. And by this point, I have to see Aliens. If I don't see Aliens, I'm going to burst. So my dad takes me along, and it was a full cinema. It was in London, and it was a full cinema. And do you remember the bit where Burke shuts the door on Ripley and Newt? They're trying to escape from the infirmary. The rear guard action. The aliens have come through the ceiling. It's an incredibly intense moment. Hudson is having his last stand, and they follow. And Burke, in his terror, shuts the door. And at that moment, somebody from the back of the cinema just shouted at the screen, "You bastard! You bastard!" out loud. And I thought, that is how powerful cinema can be in the moment that this person has forgotten he's watching a film. He's so involved. And I thought that's such a kind of a compliment to the way Cameron went about making his films right from the beginning. And also that kind of idea, that involvement is one of the themes of the documentary, is that how does this film sort of get you, by the gut and hold you in place? What is it doing? But that stayed with me. There was a kind of ripple of laughter in the cinema, but we were all straight back into film. Because, again, hysteria, we kind of understood. And so that whole science fiction thing has been an obsession of mine, a journey of mine. And as I became a professional film critic and film writer, that never went away. I was drawn to the alien films. I wanted to cover them, and I wanted to sort of go back and look at them. So it's something that's sort of faintly autobiographical as well, going on with the documentary. It's kind of the story of my life and the story of the lives of all those who backed the film, and all our, we call them backers, who've kind of been behind us, and their involvement. That it's a very personal thing that's shared by a million people, millions of people.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, I mean, many of the things you mentioned are shared experiences by me as well. And it's so funny how a lot of us of this generation remember things like that and the impact, because I can feel the same way as, like I mentioned about Alien, how it just scared the hell out of you. And there is a difference between seeing Alien in the theater versus Aliens, because like you said, you have people, yelling at the screen at aliens. And it's one of those movies where you go and you want to see it with an audience because you're going on this roller coaster ride, and it's fun and it's frightening and it's action packed and it's all these things happening, that to see it in a theater with a full house is one of those things. It was like seeing Independence Day in 95, whenever, I think in 94, 95, when that came out. I remember somebody, yelling at the screen at certain scenes and stuff. And that's the joy of going to see movies in the cinema. And the Alien, I tell you, if no one out there has seen, or people haven't seen the Alien TV commercials, those things are scary as hell. I mean, if you're sitting in your place alone at night with the lights off and you watch that commercial, the commercial is frightening as all hell. That's why it was so refreshing to see with Aliens, they weren't trying to do the same thing, that they decided to go a different direction. So when you get to do a movie like this, as I call them, a super documentary, like In Search of Darkness or In Search of Tomorrow, does it make it easier or harder for you, even though it's just on the one movie? Does it make it easier or harder when you're making a long movie like this? Does it almost 4 hours or 5 hours seem like there's still not enough time to put everything that we want it to be?
It's funny. You might think 4 hours, as you say, is a long running time for anything, let alone a documentary on aliens. But there's so much that pushes and pushes to be included and to go in. There is so much to include. And we've interviewed well over 30 people. So there's a great array of voices. But there are, the word fear is an interesting one because I've been conscious and quite fearful the whole way along in a good way. Because when a film is so beloved and so kind of explored and appreciated online, and that world only keeps growing, even though the film is 37 years old, that sort of sense of community that surrounds it on the digital realm sort of only gets bigger and bigger. You worry that what is there new to say? What what level are people already operating on in terms of things they found out? What can you do that brings some degree of originality to your documentary? And that's a battle you have to fight the whole way along. And I made my peace with that fear by falling back on the idea that that love and that passion for it is the point. That's why we're making the documentary. You're kind of starting from the idea of everybody, loves and adores this film. Why is that? And all the other questions and all the other things you then go about looking into are seen through that prism of love and passion. So from that point, I can do the making of, I can do the themes, I can do the extended universe, I can do kind of the fictional universe, backstories of characters. I can sort of go off at tangents to talk about Giga or to talk about other elements, the score, the style of Cameron's career. There's a lovely mix of tones within the documentary that at times it's very funny, especially James Cameron. He brings a lot of humor, like an older man recalling a more foolish youth, a less sort of prudent youth.
Yep.
And doing it in a very affectionate and very touching way. There's a lot of passion in people's stories. A lot of the Marine actors now have come to understand what this film means to people and really weigh into that. And there's some great voices from outside of the making, experts who sort of bring an analytical side to it, but all very much from the kind of the viewpoint of 2024 and looking back. This isn't we don't start with in 1986. James Cameron was. We know we are here now, and if you haven't seen Aliens, you're in trouble because this film really spoils it. But I kind of expect everyone has seen Aliens many times, and I've really enjoyed that sort of freedom. Once I got my head around this passion and love and thought, well, that's my driving force. That's the kind of thing that fuels me. Then that's the launch pad, and you can just wherever you go. Even if you go back and tell stories that might be familiar, you will tell them in a different way because you're telling them from the point of view of sort of fan passion and love and community.
Speaking of James Cameron, was he the key to get on board to get this movie really kind of going?
Yes and no. Obviously, he was the key desire. When you write your list of people you want to interview, the first one you put on that list is James Cameron. It was a long, involved process, sort of getting him, as you might expect. Throughout the time, he's been heavily involved with avatars and sequels. And when he is in production, he shuts the world out and is fully involved with what he's doing. So really getting the message to him took a long time. And during that process, obviously, I was building a documentary. I was interviewing lots of other people, a lot of his old friends and work colleagues, people who come up through Roger Corman with him, people like Alec Gillis and Tom Woodruff Jr. and Robert Skotak, the kind of his special effects buddies. But I always wanted him and I always knew I needed to have him. So I kind of kept going. And finally, the message came that he was going to do it and he wanted to do it. And I think what fueled that was, I think he loves the idea of who we've got and the way we're telling the story. But also, he's 69 years old now, Cameron, and I think he's interested in sort of curating his own legacy, in being sort of the history of James Cameron being written. He's a funny in the sense, he's the most successful artist alive, arguably the most successful artist who has ever lived, and yet he's never really analyzed and talked about in the same way as, say, Spielberg is or Scorsese is. They are constantly written about and rewritten about. And actually, there isn't that much around Cameron. And I thought, and I think he kind of wants that appreciation, and we wanted to bring that appreciation. So I think that drew him in. And having interviewed him in a wonderful 90-minute interview, he's so vital to the documentary. He's such a backbone to it, and such a refreshing sort of presence within it that I can't imagine it without him now.
It's so interesting too because I never really thought about it like that. I don't know very much that has been written or shot about James Cameron's career, and it's interesting because I think at one point he had not only the two most expensive movies ever made. T2 was the first movie I think that had $100 million budget. I think Titanic then, when he did that, was the most expensive movie ever made, I think, or is it Avatar? Maybe both. But he's also had the highest grossing movies of all time, too, with, I think, T2 at one point and Avatar. I used to know all the highest grossing movies of all time, but I've long since gotten that out of my head. But, I mean, it is amazing. His career, I mean, with those movies, the Terminator movies and, Avatar and Titanic. I mean, just to name a few, it's incredible. And, I mean, here's a guy who came from Corman, the guy who didn't spend anything on his movies. So ironic. But when I look at the some of the names on there, I know you have an incredible amount of people that you've interviewed. Majority of the cast. I have to ask because I know some people I'm sure have already probably asked you. A couple of names are missing. Obviously, we know Bill Paxton, sadly, and Al Matthews both passed away. Will there be any archival footage of them doing interviews, or have you made plans on how they're going to be included in the documentary?
They are. I looked at that idea, and it kind of threw it a little bit. It was slightly odd. I have significantly covered both those people within it, and their stories are told by fellow cast and filmmakers in quite impactful ways. But it's funny, the archival footage thing was a bit of a debate I was having the whole way along about, does it work? And I think one thing it sort of did was it sort of sent you backwards in time. And maybe that could work, but I kind of felt that betrayed this idea of being a documentary that's set now. And so I resisted it. But without a doubt, they are major parts of the documentary, and they have major significant kind of presence because people talk about them. I mean, Al Matthews certainly, but Bill Paxton, it gets quite moving and quite emotional as people recall what he gave to the film, but also their own friendships with him and what he was like on set. And that's one of the again, another element that I hadn't fully understood going in that was going to come out. It's funny, films almost tell you a bit about how they're going to be covered. They sort of feed back to you what the documentary will be. You have a plan and you write a synopsis and sort of turn it into a script. But in the end, the film will kind of tell you a lot. And certainly around Al Matthews and Bill Paxton, there was this idea of a very emotional element to the documentary, that it's sort of a little bit of a love letter to them both. And I hope I've sort of honored their legacies. You see Bill throughout in clips from Aliens, and you realize how important he is to that film. And Al too, Al Matthews. But you then to hear people like Michael Biehn and Carrie Henn and James Cameron and Mark Rolston, all of them talk about him, you realize that he was kind of the glue that held the film together. It was a tough shoot, a lot of conflicts, and he was so important to that. And I think that then becomes something on screen. And from the moment you first see that film, you're quoting Hudson, you're saying those lines, and he's iconic. So you have to reflect that in the documentary.
I saw something in the press release that I thought was really interesting. Yeah. Was there tension between the U.S. and U.K. crew members on the movie?
Oh, yes. It's sort of part of the Aliens legend now that You remember, this is 1985, and James Cameron is unknown. He's just made The Terminator. It's been a hit. But really, in Britain, people have no idea. It hasn't quite come out yet. And Cameron comes in, and The Terminator was a tough shoot, and it was a guerrilla kind of bit of filmmaking. They were doing 20 setups a day. He was calling the shots. He was surviving. He was getting his film made. And it had a lot of the kind of Corman influence on it. And of course, terrific seminal movie. But he arrives in Pinewood, damp London, 1985. And in that era, when you came to a London studio, you could bring sort of section heads, but the crew was handed to you by the studio. And they were a dyed-in-the-wool British crew who had done Bonds together and Kubrick movies together. And they felt they knew what was what. And this, as far as they were concerned, Canadian punk suddenly arrives and starts saying, you will do as I say. This is the way it's going to be. I want to get 20 setups a day. Cameron was so driven and still is so driven. He talks a lot about, his obsession comes from once he's got an image of the film in his head, he's unshakable from that path. It's not really about power. It's about vision and needing, almost like an addiction, to answer that vision, to get there. And immediately there was a collision. The two tectonic plates, as Cameron says, rubbed up against each other. The crew would want these kind of insufferable tea breaks at 4:00. I mean, he would literally be in the middle of a setup, turn around to find his set empty of crew because they'd all gone out to get cups of tea and sticky buns. And he said, at the time, I maybe didn't handle it as diplomatically as I could. I think he was just like, what is this? And famously, there's this kind of legend that is very humorously told in the documentary of the poor tea lady who became the focus of his fury. And, let's just say the tea urn in which the tea was made ended up with a dent in it. As a kind of mark of Cameron's reordering of how things would work. There was a lot of strain, and it was, funny enough, as VHS came along and The Terminator was released on VHS, a lot more of the crew saw the film and suddenly realized that this is what he could do and what a filmmaker he was. So it did ease off as the production went on, and there were some, there were some diplomatic missions involving Sigourney Weaver and Gail Ann Hurd that smoothed things out. But I also think Cameron, on some level, needs to be embattled as he makes a film. You look at the history of all his productions. I mean, The Abyss, that was, forget Aliens, the making of The Abyss is an epic unto itself. And of course, Titanic. And I'm sure the Avatar movies are very, very hard to make. And I think he needs that. He may not consciously need it, but I think on some level he needs it. And that tension and that strain can be felt within the narrative, within the fiction that we watch. The pressure cooker atmosphere of making Aliens is felt in the pressure cooker atmosphere of the film. And maybe he can't have it any other way. He's got to have the battle, the strain to make these films, because that's where the truth lies for him.
And they're going to find all this out in the new Aliens expanded documentary that's going to be coming out. Is there a release date yet for the film?
Well, we have a kind of an interesting, obviously we're back, we're financed by backers who essentially produced the film for us. And right now, up until May the 5th, we're doing a pre-sale on the film. It's an exclusive documentary. After May the 5th, it will not be available. It's not going for sale on Amazon. There may be a theatrical where we're looking at that, and there may be deals down the line. But if you want to watch it and you're eager to get involved, go to aliens-expanded.com and it will show you how you get involved and get your name in the credits and become part of Aliens Expanded. Feel like you are an owner of it. And there's all sorts of level tiers of involvement. And then the film will be available first on digital in mid-June. and then finally on Blu-ray and involving all sorts of sort of expanded packages in July. So that's the release pattern. So I kind of, the eagerness at this stage is, that's where the pre-sale is happening right now.
And
So
I'm going to,
exactly.
And I sorry to interrupt you. And I'm going to go over that with everyone on the, once we're done with this interview here, I'm going to give everybody all the different pay tiers that they can select from to pre-order their copy of Aliens Expanded. Ian, thank you so much for coming on the Graveyard Show podcast. This was really fantastic. I had a great time. I would love to have you come back on again for maybe even for this or for something else down the road. This was really a pleasure. Thank you for joining me here on the show.
No worries. Pleasure. Thank you.
And as I put this interview to rest, I want to again thank Ian for joining me here on the podcast. It was really nice meeting him and talking with him. There were so many more questions that I had regarding the film as well as his career that I wanted to get to. Unfortunately, time just did not permit that. So that gives me an excuse now, a really good excuse to have Ian come back on the program again down the road. As you know, I like my creator VC directors. David Weiner, I think, is the guest I've had the most on this podcast, and it's always fun talking with him too. So it'll be nice to add Ian to the long line of creative VC directors that I have on this show multiple times. He's really cool. It was great talking to him. And I look forward to having him back here again very soon. Okay, so now it's time to go over the different pre-order pay tiers that you can select from for Aliens Expanded. All prices are in US dollars, and I'm going to start with the most basic, which is the digital-only pay tier. $49 US. You will get a digital copy of Aliens Expanded. You will get your name in the credits, and you will get a digital copy of the soundtrack. The Blu-ray package, which is $99 plus shipping, you can get the Aliens Expanded Blu-ray with the slipcase. You will get 2 posters, a sew-on patch, a commemorative mini booklet, a certificate, your name in the credits. You'll also get a digital copy of Aliens Expanded and a digital copy of the soundtrack. For $139, you will get the T-shirt and Blu-ray package. So again, Aliens Expanded Blu-ray with slipcase. You will get the 2 posters, the sew-on patch, the booklet, the certificate, name in the credits, digital copy of the movie and the soundtrack, and you will get your choice to select from 2 designs of T-shirts. So you get 1 T-shirt, you get to select from 2 designs. Then there's the associate producer tier, which is $2,500. You will get your associate producer credit in the movie credit. You will get associate producer credit on IMDb, as well as on a special poster. You will have something called Your Memories Dedication in our celebratory booklet, and all rewards in the T-shirt and Blu-ray package, which I just mentioned as well. Then there is the producer package for $5,000. Again, producer credit in the movie, on IMDb, producer credit on the special poster, the celebratory booklet as well. You'll get that. And everything that is included in the T-shirt and Blu-ray package. And then lastly, you have the executive producer package, which for $10,000, you will get the EP credit in your movie credits on IMDb, on the special poster, in the celebratory booklet, and you will also get everything in the T-shirt and Blu-ray package as well. So there you have it. All the different pay tiers that you can select from for the Aliens Expanded documentary. And as I begin to close down the Graveyard, I want to remind you that, of course, the Graveyard Show podcast is available everywhere podcasts exist, as well as online on YouTube. And I am expanding it to many of the other video streaming sites that you can find online. You know where you can go and find stuff. If you missed my previous podcast, I really opened it up to different video streaming sites because My latest Catacombs of Horror video show, which I did on my favorite scenes from the movie Blackula. Well, you can listen to all that on the previous podcast, but there was a lot of problems. And I actually just recently tried making some edits and trying to do stuff to see if I could get the full video back on YouTube, and it still kept getting rejected. It is incredibly frustrating. And I'm doing everything I can, you know. Again, I'm not trying to make money off this stuff. I'm just having fun and doing videos on movies I like and why I like them. And yeah, the YouTube AI, man, it is not having any of it. I don't know how people get anything on there anymore, to be honest. So, you know, there you have it. So if you want to go to the Graveyard Show podcast on YouTube, you can certainly go there. Everything is there. All the podcasts, everything is still there. I've just opened it up now. So if you want to find my favorite scenes from the movie Blackula for Catacombs of Horror, you can do an online search, or you can go to your other alternate video streaming sites, see if the Graveyard Show podcast is on there. And if it is, you can follow me, you can like the videos, all that fun stuff. But yeah, I'm slowly building my video streaming alternate sites up. So it's taking time. It's, you know, you got to upload this stuff. You know the process if you've done this. Everything just takes time. So I'm slowly building the Graveyard Show podcasts on other video streaming sites as well. So it will be on YouTube plus fill in the blank. And if you don't see it on your favorite video streaming site, you can sure email me about that at gyspodcast@gmail.com. Let me know where you would like it to be, and I'll see about that. I just don't go to any streaming sites where you have to do a subscription, because I'm not paying for stuff that I'm doing for free. So there you go. So if it's on a site that's a subscribe only, then no. that's my answer. But if it's free, then it's me. All right, that's going to do it for me. I look forward to seeing you back here again very soon. And as you exit the graveyard, I would like to remind you to please lock the gate behind you. We wouldn't want anyone to get out. Until next time.